Well, guys, today I'm going to show you how I make bread. And I tell you, I've only made bread a couple of times since we've been home from our trip. And we've been eating store-bought bread for the last, I don't know, probably 3 weeks. And I've just been really upset at my stomach, and I couldn't figure out why, and just a lot of stomach problems. And I think it's the store-bought bread. So I'm going to go back to making my own. So anyway, I apologize for having to hold like this. I've looked high and low for my holder that I can mount this on a tripod. And it's going to show up when I'm done doing videos. Okay, so in my bowl for right now, for starters, I have like a heaping half cup of, this time I used brown sugar. I use sugar, brown sugar, honey, molasses, whatever, some kind of sweetener. I've also got 1 tablespoon of salt and 4 tablespoons of, this time I've got butter. The original recipe, and this is a very old recipe from the early 1900s, called for bacon grease. And I have used bacon grease. I use my lard, I use my tallow. I use whatever's handy, whatever I have, but most of the time I use butter. And then a heaping handful of powdered milk. Over in here I've got a half a cup of warm water, and I buy my yeast in bulk. So I've got 2 tablespoons of yeast, and I've got it dissolving and working. Some people add sugar to theirs, I don't. Anytime I add a pinch of sugar, I add yeast all over the place. So anyway, what I do is I get 2 cups of very, very hot water, and I will pour it into this mixture here. And I basically, and the reason I use really hot water is to melt the, whatever I chose, the butter. I know a lot of people nowadays are using their mixers. I still do it the old-fashioned way. I knead my bread. I mix it all by hand, and that's why I wish I could find my holder so that I could put this on a tripod to show you how I knead it. I used to stress out about making homemade bread, and now that I do it all the time, it's just so easy. And we all know it's so much better. And I know what goes in this. Mine doesn't have a bunch of preservatives to extend the shelf life. So, of course, I have to store it in the refrigerator because it does mold pretty quickly. It doesn't have a lot of preservatives, but it doesn't last all that long here. Anyway, I've got it all, I've got the butter dissolved. And what I'm going to do, and I apologize again, I just can't, I don't have that tripod. But right here in this jar is my whole wheat flour. And when I say whole wheat, I put the wheat berries from our wheat crop into my grinder, my grain grinder, and make my own wheat flour. And I do buy unbleached flour. I don't want to eat Clorox, get enough Clorox in our food. So I use all-purpose flour. I put this in, and guys, I don't measure, I apologize. I'll dump in what wheat flour I want to put in, and I'll show you the next steps. But I just dump it into that bowl and start mixing it in. I'll go ahead and show you how I mix it. I've already dumped some in and stirred it up, dumped some more in. These are gallon jars, the big old-fashioned gallon jars. That's how much I have left, so I'm going to say I used at least 4 cups, maybe more. And then I'll probably end up using a little bit more. So I just work that flour, stir it in there till I get it all mixed up. Using a stainless steel bowl and a whisk is a little difficult with one hand. But I will be adding my yeast water and 1 egg. Of course, they're farm fresh. I had to sell my chickens, but my neighbor has chickens too, so I'm now getting my eggs from her. But I'll get that all poured in there and mixed up, and then I'll come back. Okay, I've got the egg. I should have showed you the egg before I beat it in, because the best part about farm fresh eggs is those yolks, especially when your chickens are free ranged. And I know that my friend free ranges her chickens. When they're free ranged and can eat bugs and weeds and everything, the yolk is such a deep, deep yellow, almost orange. And they're just, oh, they're just so much better. We had to buy some, I think we ended up buying only 1 dozen of regular eggs at the grocery store when we were traveling, and neither of us could, we just couldn't get past the taste. So I did start buying, you know, free range organic eggs when I was traveling, of course in the store. But anyway, I'm probably going to add a little bit more wheat flour to that, and once I get it mixed up to a certain consistency, then I'm going to put some all-purpose flour on my, what I use as a pastry cloth, and I'm going to pour my dough onto that, and I will be working in the flour by hand, and I'll try to do my best with that. I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to record that, but I'll sure try. Oops, sorry guys. What I did was I dumped a bunch of all-purpose flour onto my tablecloth, aka what do they call these things? I just said it. Anyway, my pastry cloth, and it was really doughy when I do that, and I don't know, it's real sticky, yeah. So what I do, and I will try to do it one-handed, because I do it two-handed, is I just keep rolling in the flour. I work in the flour this way, and with 2 hands, of course, until it's, as the lady that this recipe came from, and by the way, she was probably born in the late 1800s, she said you knead it until it's as smooth as a baby's bottom. So anyway, I will keep kneading in the flour until it gets to, well, I guess I'll say it, until it gets as smooth as a baby's bottom. Okay, I got it all smooth as a baby's bottom. And what I do, I think I got a little bit too much. I usually put about 1 or 2 teaspoons. I put olive oil. It's the only oil I use. I'm not a real big fan of it, but I like to have something liquid in there. Anyway, I'm going to put this dough into there. I'm going to put it this side down to coat it with oil. Then I'm going to flip it over and just kind of rub oil on the top. I'll show you. Okay, I put it in there and I flipped it over, and now I just take this oil, rub it on the top. And then I'm gonna go over here and get a tea towel. I've moved it over to my stove top. Typically I put it in my oven with the light on, but I just pulled a bunch of biscuits out, so the oven's still a bit too warm. So I will set it on my stove top, cover it with a tea towel, flour sack towel, whatever you want to call it. And I will let it set and rise until double. And it'll be, I'll show you before I punch it down and go to the next step. And while I'm over here, I've been doing some cleaning. Part of my job used to be emergency preparedness. And I was cleaning out some of my old emergency bags that we got at conferences and stuff. I thought you guys might find this interesting. Bags of emergency drinking water. And I started to throw them, not throw them out, but I was going to just go ahead and put the water on my plants. And I thought, you know what? I may hang on to a few of these for a while, because I've got several packages. Because now some of you are old enough to remember back in the 50s and 60s and the fallout shelters and all the emergency preparedness that they did. And they're finding all that old food and water that was stored back then. And I'm kind of kicking myself because I had the food bars and they were outdated. So I threw them out. Now I wished I'd kept them just because. And honestly, why am I keeping this water? I don't know. I think it's kind of funny. But I'll come back when my bread is ready to go to the next step. Okay, guys. my dough has rise, whatever. And I moved it over here. And I'm going to dump it out. Kind of punch it down. You can see all the oil on it. And I'm going to let it set for a few minutes and rest. And then I'm going to try to figure out a way maybe just to prop my phone up against something so you can see how I make my bread loaves. Okay guys, this is a true rigging here. But anyway, here's my dough, and I'm just going to kind of work in that oil a little bit. And then what I do is I cut it, and I make two different sizes. I spray the inside of my pan, and I make, this isn't a full loaf, it's a smaller loaf, but it does make like a sandwich size bread. And all I do with it is just kind of pinch and roll it, put it in the pan, punch it down, shape it into the pan, and there's one loaf. And I cut off another piece. This doesn't look like quite enough, so I'll put some more dough in there, work it in there. There's really nothing to it, guys. It's so simple, you can't mess it up, really. Took me a long time to figure that out. Again, laying the pan on its side. And I'm just going to push it down in there, shape it into the pan. And then I like these little bitty pans for my toast. I like to slice my toast really thin and make it crispy. And the old farmer prefers a little bit bigger. I guess you could call it it's all in my head, because then that way I can say I had 2 slices of bread, when basically this is about the same size as 1 slice. Or 2 of those would be 1 slice. So I'm going to do the same thing. I cut what's left. I just kind of shape it. And I'll put it in here. Shape it into the pan. And this is typically what I get. I get 2 of those bigger loaves and 2 of these little loaves. I used to make, gosh, I think it was 5 loaves of these. But the old farmer really doesn't like these little loaves, so that works out okay. Anyway, I'm going to put these, I think my oven has cooled off enough now. I'm going to put these in the oven just like I did the bowl. I'm going to cover it with a tea towel, and put it in my oven with just my oven light on. That'll be just enough heat to help it rise. And then I'll be back. Okay guys, my bread has risen, whatever you want to call it. Now I'm going to turn the oven to 325 and let it bake. And it already looks like it's baked, doesn't it? Because that's all that whole wheat flour. Anyway, I'll let her bake, and I'll try to keep track of the time. I just kind of do it by look and by smell. Okay, I ordered these bread bags off of Amazon, and they're just perfect. I was using Ziploc baggies, and boy, can that get expensive. And I'll usually put 2 loaves of this size in a bread bag, and then the bread bags are plenty big for this size. You could probably put one of those, well, I know these bread bags will hold one of those Pullman loaves, which is when you buy sandwich bread at the grocery store, those longer loaves. Anyway, like I said, by putting them in the bread bag while they're still a little bit warm, that kind of keeps the steam in there, keeps my bread soft, it slices up really nice, and that's pretty much all we have anymore if I keep up with homemade bread. So As sick as I've been these past few days, well, I've not been that sick, but as my stomach's been hurting, I really think it's the store-bought bread. So we'll see what happens in a few days when I get back on homemade. Well, I was wrong. I got a large loaf and a small loaf in each bag, so I just had to use 2 bags. But I wanted to come back in and say one last thing. I think I mentioned it earlier, but I do store my homemade bread in the refrigerator. It does not have preservatives, so it will mold quicker than store-bought bread because there are no preservatives. I know everything that's in the bread that I make, and probably the thing with the most preservatives, I guess you could say, would be the powdered milk. So anyway, this is how I make bread, and I still do it the old-fashioned, hand knead it and mix it by hand, but nothing beats homemade bread. Alright guys, talk to you later.